Welcome to a story as intense as any action movie, except the enemy isn't the mafia or secret agents. It's a fake HOA with a full-blown land-grabbing conspiracy. If your heart's racing and your hands are gripping the armrest right now, trust me, you're not alone. What would you do if you were Wyatt? Would you back down or strike back? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because sometimes the right words at the right time can reach thousands going through the same thing. I used to think the biggest trouble I'd face after moving out to the countryside would be raccoons tearing up my vegetable garden or an old irrigation system that needed replacing. But then I met Greg Falk, and it took exactly 90 seconds to realize he wasn't there to welcome me. That afternoon, I was lying under my 1969 Mustang, tightening the exhaust pipe, when a shadow stretched across the ground, long and slow, like the tongue of a stalking predator. I rolled out, wiped my hands, and stood up to see him. Windbreaker embroidered with HOA, reeking of fake authority, knockoff sunglasses, and a clipboard clutched to his chest like he was guarding the U.S. Constitution. "Good afternoon," he said, voice as dry as rotted wood. "Are you the new owner of Lot 42C? I nodded, wiping grease off my palms. "Unless this is a covert federal raid, then yeah, I'm Wyatt." Greg didn't smile. He just glanced at the Mustang, bright red and gleaming, like he'd just witnessed an environmental crime of the highest order. "We've received a complaint," he said, flipping a page on his clipboard. I raised an eyebrow. "That was fast. I haven't even unpacked my last box." "The engine noise," he replied, "exceeded acceptable levels for this residential area." I chuckled. "What did you measure that with? A hairdryer or a hunch?" His jaw tightened, eyes locked on mine. That kind of silence I'd seen before, on battlefields, not from lack of words, but from calculating which threat would land best. "We expect all residents to adhere to community standards," he said. Calm tone, but every word dropped like a nail being driven in. I knew his type. Didn't need real power, just the illusion of control. And Greg wasn't there to ask. He was there to dictate. But before I could fire back, heavy footsteps echoed from behind the barn. Virgil Boone emerged from the shadows, rifle slung over one shoulder, cigar glowing between his fingers. He didn't ask, didn't greet, just growled, "You got a warrant to be on this land, son?" Greg turned. "And who are you?" Virgil narrowed his eyes. "Former sniper, and you're standing on land that ain't yours." I stood beside him, said nothing, didn't need to. Greg backed off, but before leaving, he gave the Mustang one last look. "Nice car," he muttered. "Shame if the fines made it too expensive to fix." He left, but the threat lingered like poison dust in the air. I glanced at Virgil. He took a long drag, exhaled, and muttered two words. "War's coming." There's something about Virgil Boone that strangers would never guess. He doesn't talk much, doesn't boast about his past, but every step he takes carries a silent warning. That night, I was fine-tuning the infrared sensors along the southern fence when I heard a soft metallic scrape, like steel brushing against rotten wood. I turned around and saw him stepping out of the horse barn, slinging an old Remington M40 over his shoulder, the kind of rifle only men who once took aim through jungle foliage in Southeast Asia would hold like a sacred relic. "You start seeing them yet?" he asked, voice low and rough, every word steeped in the scent of a well-aged Cuban cigar. I nodded. "Not an HOA, not neighbors, they're soldiers." Virgil didn't flinch. He just dragged a chair onto the porch, laid the rifle across his lap like he was cradling a grandchild, and pulled a military-grade monocular from his chest pocket. "I know that kind of movement," he said. "That's not how homeowners patrol. That's how men cross borders without permission." I sat down beside him, eyes fixed on the distant tree line. Maybe for the first time, I saw him switch into combat mode. He wasn't the quiet old man who brewed coffee at sunrise anymore. He was a soldier, one who'd never truly come home. "Ever seen this kind of operation before?" I asked. Virgil peered through the scope, then said something I'll never forget. "Cambodia. 1971. Night was just as quiet, until it wasn't. That sent a chill down my spine, because I knew he wasn't just remembering. He was drawing a comparison. He pointed to the tree cover 200 yards out. No flashlights, moving low, not a sound. That means either they're trained, or they used to be operatives. I clenched my jaw, eyes locked on the canopy. What do they want? Virgil gave a tight-lipped grin, but it wasn't a smile, just a look only survivors can make. Not what, who, and the answer's you. He took another long draw on his cigar, the ember glowing in the dark. I used to think I'd die in peace, next to my old radio and a cup of cold coffee, but it looks like death now comes with code violations and forged signatures. We sat there all night, an old man who had survived 3 ambushes, and a former recon scout who thought he'd left the battlefield behind. I looked at him, then at the perimeter of my land. When do you think they'll come back? Virgil took one more slow puff and answered, with the calm certainty of someone describing tomorrow's weather. When you turn off the lights, because that's when soldiers hunt, when everyone thinks they're safe. They didn't come back that night, but they left a message, subtle, deliberate, just to remind me they had been here, and that they could return anytime they wanted. At first light, I went out to check the southern tree line where Virgil had planted some motion-triggered traps. That's when I found it, a faint boot print in the dirt. The kind only someone with training knows how to leave, clear enough to be noticed, faint enough not to trace. Nearby, a cigarette butt. Menthol, cheap. The filter stained with a smudge of red lipstick. Virgil glanced at it and grunted a single word. Karen. That night, I pulled every hard drive from my camera system and combed through every second of footage from the past week. Nothing. No movement, no shadows. My enemies weren't just watching. They knew how not to be seen. I started going through everything I'd overlooked. Old mail, utility bills, packages left by the front steps. In my desk drawer, I found 3 more unmarked envelopes identical to the first, each containing a veiled threat, disguised in bureaucratic language for the benefit of the community. Continued resistance may affect your standing in the neighborhood. Unassimilated properties are subject to reevaluation. Isolation breeds misunderstanding, and misunderstanding leads to loss. I pinned all 3 letters next to the surveillance photo from my garage, turning the wall of my workshop into a warboard, just like I'd done during counter-terror ops overseas. Except this time, the enemy shared my zip code. Virgil, meanwhile, began reinforcing our perimeter. He installed 2 new infrared floodlights, raised the barn camera another 10 feet, and restrung the perimeter lines with nearly invisible monofilament that shimmered only under moonlight. When I asked if it was overkill, he replied without hesitation, "Paranoia is the only reason I made it through 3 tours. It'll get you through this one, too." The next night, around 2:17 a.m., one of our perimeter sensors went off. Location, southern tree line, too fast for a deer, too heavy for a coyote. And by the time I reached it, it was gone. Left behind in the dirt, a small wooden stake, red tip, the kind surveyors use to mark land about to be cleared. Karen didn't just want me scared. She wanted me to know the deal had already been drafted, and my signature was the one thing she no longer needed. The next morning, Hank Mercer, my neighbor from over the ridge, knocked on my door. He wasn't there for a chat. He was there to warn me. "I used to have a steel shed out back," he said, hand trembling as he held the glass of water I gave him. "They said it hurt community value." 3 days later, my water was shut off. No explanation, no appeal. Took 6 weeks to get it back. I asked what he did after that. Hank stared down at the wooden floorboards. "I sold the house." I knew what he meant. Don't fight. But I'm not the kind of man who sells off his homeland because of an unsigned letter. And I sure as hell don't bow to an empire built on clipboards, threats, and fear. I had no doubts left. What was happening here wasn't overzealous community management. It was a campaign, organized, well-funded, with manpower, infrastructure, and most importantly, a clear objective. That afternoon, I sat in the workshop, one hand gripping a can of Dr. Pepper, the other gliding a mouse across an old computer screen. I'm no tech wizard like Mick Shaw, my old teammate who specialized in electronic intel, but I knew enough to dig into things most folks wouldn't even think to question. And what I found made my throat tighten. The legal entity Karen represented wasn't an HOA. There was no Covenant Green HOA registered in the State Housing Department database, but there was a close match, Covenant Green Holdings, LLC, a limited liability company formed in Colorado just 6 months ago, listed under residential development investment. I kept digging. This company owned 3 subsidiaries. One of them bore a name I'd seen before in classified briefings, Liongate Tactical Solutions. And if you've ever served overseas like I have, you know that name isn't a joke. Liongate was a private military contractor, a mercenary outfit, permanently blacklisted by the US government after a civilian massacre during a so-called riot mediation operation in West Africa. The incident was quickly buried, but in intelligence circles, Liongate was infamous. Wrong men, wrong mission, catastrophic outcome. And now they were back in my neighborhood, hiding behind terms like noise inspections, grass violations, and community aesthetic enforcement. I leaned back in my chair, silent, mind racing. If I was right, this HOA wasn't a homeowners association at all. It was a front, a backdoor conduit for a systematic land acquisition campaign, designed to classify residents as non-compliant, then coerce transfers or initiate disguised foreclosures. I stood up, went to my safe, and pulled out the flash drive I'd extracted from one of the devices their so-called inspection team left behind. Inside the drive, a list of 12 properties, including mine, tagged as non-compliant, with surveillance logs, behavioral resistance reports, and one line in bold red, Phase 5, ready for reclamation. A polite term for asset seizure. I wasn't just under threat anymore. I was the target. I opened a map and marked each flagged property, a goat farm on the ridge, an elderly couple's organic garden, an old man's native plant nursery, the same one the HOA once said was damaging community image. This entire area was ground zero for a disguised redevelopment operation, and people like me, Virgil, and those just trying to live in peace, we were the final obstacles. Virgil stepped into the workshop. I handed him a printed copy. He read it, furrowed his brow, then folded the paper slowly. "They don't think we know," he said. "Exactly," I replied. "And that's why they got sloppy." 40. I found the tracking device beneath the Mustang while checking the undercarriage under the sickly yellow light of the garage. A magnetic GPS chip, no bigger than a matchbox, tucked neatly next to the rear axle. Discreet, tight, and smart enough to bypass standard motion sensors. If I hadn't been suspicious and pulled apart the exhaust system, I never would have found it. But they made a fatal mistake. They thought I was still asleep. I didn't remove the tracker. Instead, I left it right where it was, then changed the context. I taped it onto a motorized decoy, tucked it into the Mustang's trunk, and began a new game. Reflex trap. Using signal spoofing software, I created a fake routine. The Mustang would leave the ranch each morning, park at the gas station near town, stop at the grocery store, and return 90 minutes later. The signal stayed consistent. I wanted them to believe I was living a normal life. Meanwhile, Virgil installed 2 new thermal cameras, one hidden in the carved head of a wooden lion, and another inside the mouth of a stuffed goat we kept by the barn. If anyone stepped onto my land again, even an inch, I'd see it. By the 3rd day, I decided to escalate. I had the Mustang drive farther, this time to a suburb 20 miles out, a place I knew they'd see as their opportunity. I programmed the tracker to send a vehicle exited zone alert at exactly 1 a.m. Then I turned off every light in the house, played the perfect mark. At precisely 3:17 a.m., the southern perimeter sensor lit up. No sound, no flashlights. Just a faint red blink as a drone skimmed the tree line. I didn't fire, didn't shine a light, just recorded everything. The drone dropped a small black object near the mailbox. Virgil and I stepped out in camouflage, shotguns at the ready. The package was wrapped in black duct tape. Inside, a photo. Virgil, sitting on the porch, cigar in hand, rifle by his side, shot from the tree line, every wrinkle on his brow captured like a studio portrait. Virgil stared at it for a long time, then nodded. No doubt left. This isn't a threat. This is a target marker. I didn't speak, just silently removed the tracker from the decoy, took it into the workshop, and connected it to the signal reader. Using 3 satellite pings, I triangulated where the tracker's feedback was being received. A point less than 3 miles from the neighborhood, an old warehouse beneath the high-voltage transmission lines. I looked at Virgil. "What do we do with this info?" he asked. I pulled up the map, drew a bold red circle around the location. "We let them think the device is still active, and when they come to inspect..." I paused, tapping the board on the wall, now covered in photos, thread lines, and resident profiles. "They won't just walk into a hideout. They'll walk into something more real than any intel they've ever collected. They'll walk into a battlefield." 40. We used to think we were alone, that the harassment from the HOA was just isolated. But it wasn't. It was strategy, and we were on the list. 2 days after the drone marked Virgil, I was reviewing the hallway camera feed when I heard it. 3 short knocks, 1 long. Not a delivery, not a friend. It was a signal, one Virgil and I used during patrol rotations back at training camp. I opened the door. It was Hank Mercer, the neighbor from over the ridge. But this wasn't the anxious, defeated man I'd met before. His face was set like steel. In his hand, an envelope, steady this time. "She fined me $3,000, he said bluntly. "Reason, violation of community visual standards." I raised an eyebrow. "The fence?" He shook his head. "The oak tree in my front yard. It doesn't align with the neighborhood perspective axis." That's a direct quote. I brought him into the workshop, pointed to the map covered in red thread, flagged addresses, anonymous letters, thermal cam captures, and tracking data. Hank stared at it, then exhaled deeply. "I'm not the only one," he said. Then pulled out a handwritten list. 4 names, 4 stories. Rita Holloway, 68, planted native flowers instead of artificial turf. Her water was shut off for a week. Thomas and Jean Cutler, an elderly couple growing organic vegetables, threatened with land seizure for unauthorized agricultural development. Darius King, black veteran, living alone, received letters demanding he withdraw from the community for lowering relocation value. And finally, Jonas Ridge, goat farmer, had his license revoked due to odor-related psychological distress to neighbors. I looked at Hank. He nodded as if, for the first time, he'd found a place to stand. Virgil stepped out, Remington slung across his shoulder, voice low and gravelly. "We've got names. We've got targets. We've got motive. What are we missing?" "Just one thing," I replied. "Organization." That night, we gave it a name. The line, not official. Just a reminder. Once they cross it, there's no going back. I broke us into cells, one for evidence, one for tech, one for anomaly tracking. Hank would handle communications. Rita took over old HOA documentation. Virgil, perimeter. We didn't make noise, didn't go to the press, didn't wave banners. But one by one, those once silent neighbors began stepping out of the shadows. And for the first time since coming back to this land, I didn't feel hunted. I felt like I was building an army. There are 2 kinds of silence before a confrontation. One is filled with fear, trembling hands, quiet regret, silent prayers. And the other, the kind where everyone knows exactly what's about to happen, so no one needs to say a word. We were the second kind. 1:42 a.m. The wind stopped cold. Even the bugs in the corn rows held their breath. I stood on the porch, steel mug of black coffee in one hand, shotgun resting loosely at my side. Virgil sat 2 steps away, his old M40 lying across his knees, eyes fixed on the thermal screen in my hand. "They're close now," he said. Not a guess, but a statement. 4 heat signatures appeared on the screen. Low, deliberate, moving from the southern tree line, just as I predicted. They thought I was gone, fooled by the GPS tracker still feeding them fake routes from the Mustang. They couldn't resist the chance to move in when the owner was out. 3:04, the fiber optic sensor at the perimeter tripped. 3 intruders swept toward the garage. 1 split off toward the goat barn. No lights, no talking, military precision. I stepped back inside and signaled Virgil, phase 2. The yard lights burst on for a single second, just enough to blind, then snapped off like a lightning strike. A low thump echoed from the garage. Flashbang rigged inside the oil drum. No lethal damage, but enough to blur vision and scramble equilibrium. The first guy slipped on the slick of grease I'd poured across the concrete, cracked his head on a toolbox, and dropped, unconscious. Second guy lunged in to help, and caught a beanbag round from Virgil's Remington, launched backward, gasping like his lungs had collapsed. Third one turned and ran. Didn't get far, snared by the foot trap wired beneath the porch. He went down hard, and Virgil was on him in an instant, pinning him like a catfish in the mud. The fourth, sharpest of the bunch, slipped in through the rear door, trying to hit the kitchen. But he didn't expect pitch black. Every light in the house had been killed. I was waiting, right behind the pantry door. When I heard the faint creak of a boot on the wood floor, I moved, snapped his wrist in under half a second, dragged him to the ground, disarmed his Glock with the same fluid motion I'd drilled 100 times in hostage extractions. In under 4 minutes, all four were down, restrained, disarmed, laid out under the yellow light of the barn like they were waiting for roll call. I didn't feel victorious. I felt confirmed. Confirmed that these weren't HOA reps. They wore tactical gear, carried zip ties, blueprints of my property, syringes filled with sedatives, and a printed dossier on my land with a bright red stamp. Reclamation, Phase 5. They weren't here to talk. They were here to take. 40. We didn't turn the intruders over to the police, not because we don't believe in the law, but because I know damn well the law out here has either been blinded or bought, and we needed them to believe their plan was still intact. I planted a reverse tracking device on one of the radios they carried, a bug the size of a fingernail, just enough to ping once the unit was powered back on within a 5-mile range. 3 hours later, it lit up. Location: an abandoned greenhouse compound just outside the neighborhood boundary, supposedly deserted since the 90s. No name on maps, but the power lines, still live. Too live for a place that's abandoned. I called Mick Shaw. Need an eye in the sky, I told him. Who are we watching? Karen, and whoever's erasing her footprints. 3 hours later, Mick sent me full thermal drone scans. The greenhouse wasn't empty. Trucks came and went every 3 hours. There were sentries, 4 active wireless nodes, and in one of the structures, 2 servers sitting on insulated racks. Virgil stood behind me, watching the layered satellite map on the screen. That's not an HOA office, he muttered. That's a Mission Command Center. I nodded. And we need what's inside before they burn it to the ground. We moved at 2358. I carried a short barrel carbine, body cam, and an electrical grid map Hank dug out of the town archives. Virgil brought his trusted Remington, plus 2 old flashbangs I'd held onto since my rapid response training days. We didn't drive. We rode Juno, my pitch-black mare, silent, powerful, invisible to drones. We crossed a narrow ravine, looped through an overgrown access trail, and approached the greenhouse from the north, the only blind spot where their cameras had already failed. 1:14. We killed the compound's power by blowing the secondary junction box out back. Total blackout. We entered through a side door, unlocked, as if they thought no one would dare come here. First mistake. Inside, scattered paperwork, zoning maps, property lists marked ready for reclamation, households flagged as priority targets with attached success likelihood ratios. It read like a battle plan, not civil paperwork. Virgil quietly removed the server drives. I photographed every dossier, every diagram. Then I found it. In a drawer, beneath a stack of files, an envelope. Inside, a forged property transfer form. My name, my land, signed by someone else. Stamped Covenant Green Holdings. Issue date. The day before they tried to infiltrate my farm. They weren't trying to intimidate me. They were preparing to erase me. When we pulled out, I didn't feel fear, didn't feel anger. I felt like I was holding a weapon, a lever. And Karen, she had no idea that her entire operation had just been blown open from the roots. The next morning, I didn't brew coffee. I brewed war. The hard drive Virgil pulled from the greenhouse. It never touched a networked computer. I brought it into the shop and plugged it into an isolated laptop. No operating system, no Wi-Fi, no Bluetooth, no open ports. The whole thing ran off a closed-source OS, booted from a USB. I didn't need all the data, just the part Karen couldn't deny. And I found it, tucked inside a folder named Phase 6 Final. Inside was everything. Detailed maps of every parcel in the region, already seized properties, investment yield projections, post-rezoning, and an audio file, Karen Ballock's voice. Once Wyatt McCrae is forced off, we can initiate emergency land use rights for the Southern Tract. This property will serve as the prototype for the expansion chain. No euphemisms, no hypotheticals, no legal qualifiers. She said it flat out. Land seizure, planned, precise, personal. Virgil nodded slowly. We'll need more than that to bury her. I knew. And I had someone, Jennings Cole, independent journalist, exposed the school board embezzlement scandal last year. Lives 12 miles out. Virgil once saved his life in Panama. Something about a snake, tequila, and a runaway canoe. Virgil made the call. Didn't have to explain. Jennings drove straight over. I didn't give him the original drive. I gave him an encrypted copy, along with a temporary site I built using open source tools, thecovenantfiles.org. On it, maps of the seized properties, photos of the forged documents, Karen's voice, clear as ice, and a clip of the 3 captured intruders, zip ties, land maps, signed forfeiture orders in hand. Jennings didn't just publish the story, he lit the internet on fire. Within 3 hours, it was viral. By afternoon, 2 local news stations had reporters outside the fake HOA's headquarters, a white trailer behind the clubhouse where Karen held her monthly meetings. For the first time, I wasn't on defense. I was attacking, with truth. Karen called an emergency meeting at 6 p.m. She stepped to the podium in crisp white, voice shaking, lips tight like she'd just fought her own conscience. This community is under attack by outside forces. The article is fabricated. The voice is a deep fake. The data's been manipulated. I walked in, didn't ask for permission. Virgil followed, still smelling of tobacco smoke. Jennings sat in the back row, recorder in hand, finger hovering like he was about to drop a second nuke. I plugged my laptop into the main projector. The screen lit up. Phase 6. Property conversion plan. First column, Wyatt McCrae. Second column, reclamation scheduled, August 22nd. Then her voice played, cold, deliberate. He's stubborn, but it's fine. The paperwork's already signed. The rest, our team will handle. The room froze. Then a voice. My name's on that list too. It was Hank, then Rita, then the old man with the native plants. One by one, voices rose, like stones falling on Karen's back. She cracked. You don't understand, she stammered, but no one was listening. No, I said, we understand perfectly, and now, so will the authorities. Flashbulbs went off, and Karen Bellock, once the reigning queen of HOA power, was now surrounded by the very people she tried to evict from their own land. She stepped down from the podium, speechless. But we had spoken loud enough, and the truth was already live. 40. Karen stepped down from the podium like the ground had vanished beneath her feet. But I knew she was never the final target, just the mask. The decoy pushed to the front to give a legal face to something darker lurking behind. We had to dig deeper. That same night, I called Mick Shaw. He didn't ask questions, just one sentence. Which layer do you want cracked first? I sent him everything we had. Covenant Green Holdings registration ID, its legal rep's office address, the list of contractors paid through shadow accounts. 3 days later, Mick called back, voice sharp as a scalpel. Covenant Green is a shell, 3rd tier. Above it is a real estate revitalization fund. But the money? Not government-backed. It's sourced from an anonymous fund, tied to 3 prior land seizures in Texas, Nevada, and Arizona. The parent company's name is Foresight Urban Development. Address, basement office of a Denver law firm. No public director. But I've got a photo, taken during a luxury vehicle registration. Same logistics manager Karen used. We had the address, we had the chain, and now we had the state. Jennings, backed by attorneys and investigative reporters, filed a formal petition with the state attorney general's office. Attached was everything. How Covenant Green impersonated an HOA, the shell company architecture, the forged property transfers, even geotagged images of tract residents. And Virgil, he did the most unexpected thing of all. He handwrote a 4-page letter, signed it with his real name, included an old photo of himself in uniform and a list of elderly homeowners who'd been forced off their land. Jennings published it in full. It spread like wildfire. Then the dominoes fell. 1 week later, the Covenant Green Holdings website went offline, replaced by a Department of Justice banner under federal investigation. All operations suspended. Search warrants followed across 2 states. They uncovered 4 more shell companies, all part of the same scheme. Fake violations, triggered foreclosures, internal land transfers. The local police, who once shrugged us off, now had to hold a press conference. 6 officers reassigned, 2 suspended for undisclosed affiliations with private community control groups. As for Karen, she was indicted on 17 criminal counts: forgery of public records, invasion of privacy, abuse of community authority for personal gain, and more. Every home once threatened by the fake HOA. Ownership restored. Fines voided. Residents who fled under duress invited back with compensation from the state's legal assistance fund. And us, me, Virgil, Hank, and the rest, we didn't want medals, just to see the cracked walls rebuilt. This time, with trust, not fear. The cleanup operation didn't end with gunfire, but the shockwaves it left behind, unmistakable. And if some other HOA in some other town ever thinks about pulling a Karen, I hope they look at the scar still visible on the edge of McRae Ranch. And understand this land was once a front line, and we won. 40. Some stories don't begin with gunfire. They begin with a knock at the door. Software, but laced with threat. The story of Wyatt McRae wasn't just a battle against a fake neighborhood council. It was a sobering reminder. When power goes unchecked, it can quietly take everything we thought we owned, even our freedom. The first lesson: silence protects no one. Many residents were fined, harassed, or forced from their homes, and they chose to quietly back down, afraid of trouble, convinced it wouldn't happen to them. But when silence becomes instinct, evil doesn't just survive, it thrives. The silence of the many is the most powerful weapon in the manipulator's arsenal. The second lesson: truth needs defenders. Wyatt wasn't a journalist. He wasn't a lawyer, not a politician. He was just a man living on his family's land, refusing to bow to a rigged system. But that refusal, combined with resolve, strategy, and belief, made him the last wall standing between justice and deception. You don't need power to resist what's wrong. You just need to stand your ground, right where you are. The third lesson: communities aren't built on rules. They're built on trust. When the fake HOA took over, they didn't lead with law. They led with fear. And the moment people believed they had to comply to stay safe, the very idea of community vanished. But when Hank, Rita, Darius, and others stood together, they didn't just bring down Karen. They reclaimed the unity that had been stolen from them. And finally, this story proves a hard truth. Wrongdoing has structure, but so does what's right. Karen had lawyers, money, a whole system. But Wyatt had a map, a team, and conviction. And the world still holds because of people like him. People who won't accept wrong just because it's normal. Whoever you are, a quiet neighbor, a father protecting his family, or a citizen just growing skeptical of the world, remember this: you always have the right to say no. And sometimes the right no, spoken at the right time, can save an entire community. If this story made you rethink ownership, freedom, and the courage it takes to stand up against injustice, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Every share is a step toward breaking the silence. How did Wyatt's fight and his community's resistance make you feel? What would you do if this happened to your own family? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, whether you agree or not, because every voice deserves to be heard.